Hello and welcome back to Music Theory Fluency. Today we're going to be continuing on past our natural minor scale, learning about the harmonic minor scale. This is a minor scale that better explains what happens in the harmony, while not accounting for our Western melodic ideas. We'll be exploring how we integrate the leading tone into a minor scale, listening for the augmented second that's created, and then going over a common chord progression that would use this scale to help us really understand why this scale exists and what it's trying to teach us. All right, let's get into it.
To get started, let's take our A natural minor scale. And in our A natural minor scale, we have our tonic, supertonic, mediant, subdominant, dominant, submediant. And in this case, we'd have a subtonic, the whole step below the next tonic. So in our scale degree video, we talked about how minor scales can also contain a leading tone. And this is why minor scales would have three different forms of the scale, as there's the first one we talked about in our natural minor scale video that just accounts for the notes in the key signature. When we play our harmonic minor scale, we're going to exchange the subtonic G for the leading tone G sharp, as every minor scale must still follow the alphabetic rule of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A for a natural minor scale, and A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. Still using only one form of the G, in this case now, the leading tone G sharp. This will always create that half step from tonic down to leading tone, as the leading tone must always be a minor second below the tonic. Let's take another scale. Let's take our D minor. First, finding our natural minor. Here's my subtonic. I can raise it by a half step to now become a leading tone. That is a half step away from my tonic. Now we notice with our harmonic minor scale, it has a bit of an exotic sound. Probably reminds a lot of people of music from Aladdin or even Russian music. And this is because of the augmented second created. As when we've dealt with our major and minor scales up to this point, every step has been a half step or a whole step. Whole, half, half, whole. But now, when we create this leading tone over here, this is the first time that we have a step that is not a half step or a whole step. When I go from my F to my G sharp, this is still considered F to G, so it's a second. But F to G is my major second, and so I expand it by an extra half step, and I get what sounds like a minor third, but since it's spelled F to G sharp, this would be our augmented second right here. The fact now that we have this augmented second in a scalar context kind of breaks our brain a little bit for what our music normally sounds like, and what we naturally hear then is we hear music from other cultures, that this is not normally what melodies sound like when we listen to classical music or pop music, jazz music. And so that's why we call this the harmonic minor scale, as this scale defines what is happening harmonically in our music, but a little bit of foreshadowing, we will have another minor scale that kind of masks this sound of the leading tone melodically, so that we can hear Western melodies that do contain leading tones sometimes, and do contain subtonics sometimes. The location of this augmented second between scale degrees 6 and 7, or between the submediant and the leading tone, can help make it more comfortable finding harmonic minor scales. Let's say we're taking A flat harmonic minor, and I am really confident in my first four notes, and I know I've got my half step to my submediant, and I can trust now that I have this augmented second that's of course not a half step, not a whole step, but a half step bigger, the augmented second. Because Because while it might be great that we understand what the note is, how it relates to the next tonic, there's going to be times where as we're playing through a scale, we have a brief moment of pause, or we have a slight little bit of a memory lapse. Simply knowing what the next interval is to the next note and understanding what sound we're about to create can be very helpful and make us feel much more secure getting into that next passage. So now, since this is called a harmonic minor scale, let's talk about some chords and some harmony and how this actually works. We'll be taking a very common chord pattern, our 1, 4, 5, 1 in A minor. We'll first start by finding our bass notes. 1, 4, 5, 1. My tonic, subdominant, dominant, tonic. We will then see that each of these has the number in Roman numerals. Lowercase would imply that we are dealing with minor chords, the uppercase, major chords. I have my minor 1, my minor 4, my major 5, and my minor 1. We can tell that to make this major 5 chord the E major, this is the leading tone, G sharp, that is used to lead us back to the A. If I use the G natural instead, the subtonic, we can hear the difference. Not nearly as much harmonic pullback to the tonic. There, the ear feels that return back to the tonic. A, so much stronger and really feels like a railroad track driving us right back to our home base. Now, we're going to take some common tones and rearrange these chords. So here, with my A minor, rather than going all the way up to my D minor, I'll keep the A the same in the bottom, with the D and the F on the top. I can return back to my A minor chord, and same thing, rather than jumping all the way up, I can keep my E on the top and have my G sharp and B on the bottom. 1, 4, 1, 5, 1. And we did add an extra 1 chord into this version of the chord progression just for the ease of motion. And what we can now notice is, with all these chords, these are all the notes of our harmonic minor scale, just rearranged in a different pattern. I have my A, the B from my E major chord, my C, the D from the D minor chord, my E, and this creates my A minor pentascale, or A minor 5-note scale. I then have the F, the half step above my dominant, as when we move from a dominant to a submediant in minor, it'll always be this half step. And now, when we have our leading tone on the bottom, the G sharp, this is of course the half step below our tonic. And now we notice when approached this way, the harmonic minor scale no longer has this Eastern sound where we hear the music of Aladdin or we hear our Russian music. When we avoid that augmented second, it just sounds like our normal music. It sounds like westernized music, especially harmonically. This sounds like a lot of music we're used to hearing from Beethoven, Mozart, Schumann. This is all very standard harmony. It's once we get back into the scale and we hear the augmented second, that our ears are drawn back. So stay tuned, as we'll be going over our melodic minor scale very soon and how we overcome this augmented second to create Western sounding melodies using a leading tone in a minor key.
Now that we have these connections between what the scale sounds like melodically, and yes, it doesn't sound traditionally melodic as we might expect, that's why it's called the harmonic minor scale. And we better understand why our ears don't hear this as a melodic scale. We understand why our ears would tend to be confused at the sounds created by this scale, but then also understanding why this scale is used to explain what we have in our harmony often, what we have in the left hand of our music. We can really ingrain these concepts so that way we're not having to return to books to constantly remind ourselves what are the notes of this harmonic minor scale, or being scared of the scale because it sounds different. Instead, we can approach it with confidence and understanding to make our practice much more enjoyable. Happy practicing.